Yo, what is up guys? Stelboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. So last July, we had one of the most hyped fights in boxing in recent memory in Terence Crawford versus Errol Spence Jr. Of course, a welterweight unification, undisputed bout that Terence Crawford won in dominating fashion. And in the fallout of that fight, many of us were speculating that Errol Spence Jr. didn't look himself, didn't look like the fighter he used to be. And for me it was obvious, for me it was clear, that Spence certainly wasn't fighting at his optimum level, and I happen to believe he will never get to that level again. I believe Errol Spence Jr. is deteriorating in quick time. I think his body's taken a lot of punishment, not even just in the ring, but outside the ring, the car crash, etc. Talks of alcohol abuse, etc. Things like that, not living the life. There's a whole myriad of reasons as to why Errol Spence Jr. could be breaking down as a fighter, as an athlete. Now, following that fight, those of us who did question the health of Errol Spence Jr. and the condition that he was in, we were told we were being conspiracy theorists. Just give Terence Crawford his credit, don't take credit away from Crawford. Just basically pretend like you didn't see what you just saw, or what we thought we saw at least. And for me, like I said, I felt Errol Spence Jr. looked like a compromised fighter. That's what I saw in that ring. He clearly wasn't himself as far as I'm concerned. But again, if you said that, then, again, you as a conspiracy theorist. These guys live on a different planet who just shill and fanboy for these fighters, because that fight did have a very emotional build-up. There were the Errol Spence Jr. fanboys and the Terence Crawford fanboys, the anti-PBC crowd. So regardless, Errol Spence Jr., if you're one of the anti-PBC guys or a Terence Crawford fanboy, Errol Spence Jr. could have gone in there with a wooden leg and an eye patch, and these people would still be saying, just give Crawford his credit, Spence was in his prime. That's how invested these guys were in this fight. They were willing to turn a blind eye to what was obvious, in my opinion, and doing so, yeah, you may get your cheap little points on PBC, and I'm not a PBC fan, as you guys know. You may get your little cheap points to score over PBC fanboys, but it doesn't do boxing any good when we act like certain fights are legitimate, or we act like Errol Spence Jr. was in his prime against Terence Crawford, because at that point, when we're doing that, we're just okaying these fights happening way too late. We say we're okay with being made to wait half a decade before these fights happen, and when they do happen, they're not what they should be, and that to me was the case with Errol Spence Jr. versus Terence Crawford. Now, I don't care who you blame in regards to that. But anyway, I digress. Today, Errol Spence Jr. came out on social media and announced that he has had surgery on his eye due to cataracts. Obviously, cataracts is a clouding of the eye lens, and honestly, for most people, it's mainly common when you age. So when you get to your 60s, your 70s, your 80s, etc. That's when cataracts usually occurs naturally. It comes with aging. For young people, it's a lot more rare, and obviously Errol Spence Jr. is a young man. Now, cataracts can occur naturally in some young people due to genetics, but it's generally considered as a condition that occurs with aging. Some of the other reasons for why cataracts may affect a young person: eye injuries, eye trauma. Obviously, as we know, a few years ago, Errol Spence Jr. was supposed to fight Manny Pacquiao, but he pulled out due to an eye injury. I believe it was a retina injury, if memory serves me correct. Also, of course, a couple of years before that, Errol Spence Jr. was involved in a very serious car crash, was lucky to be alive, and obviously we saw an image after that crash, and it showed that Errol Spence Jr., one of his eyes was extremely bloodshot, like it took some sort of damage or trauma, so to speak. Also as well, cataracts in young people can actually be brought on by substance abuse, mainly alcohol. Once again, many of us have said and speculated that Spence doesn't seem to be living the life outside the ring. Of course, a few years ago, it seemed like every Errol Spence Jr. video, he was 3 sheets to the wind, pissed out of his head. And many people were talking about that prior to the Crawford fight, many years prior to the Crawford fight. So there are reasons as to why this cataracts condition may be due to something else other than genetics and bad luck. We've seen enough from Spence now to suggest that it may be down to his lifestyle, combined with the trauma of boxing, the car crash, the alcohol. It could be a contribution from all of those things, to be honest. To me, from the outside looking in, it seems like he's breaking down. I don't think he's ever looked quite the same since the car crash, and as he's getting older and obviously sustaining more punishment, it seems like he's breaking down even quicker. Errol Spence is falling apart, he's done. I don't see him achieving anything great from here on out. And for Terence Crawford fanboys, let's stop pretending that Spence was in his prime that night, or anywhere near his prime. He clearly wasn't. Clearly a spent force. If he wasn't, he will still go on to have success from this point in his career, not involving Terence Crawford. He'll still go on to have some success if he was that close to his prime in the Terence Crawford fight. And if he doesn't have that success, which I suspect he won't, you know what the narrative will then be? Oh, Terence Crawford ruined him. Despite them saying to me that was a prime Spence on fight night. We saw a prime Spence walk through straight right hands from Kell Brook. Kell Brook could punch. Not a one-hitter quitter, but he could really punch. And Spence walked through those shots and took them really well. That was a prime Spence and prime Spence punch resistance. You're telling me that the Spence that couldn't take a jab was in his prime against Crawford. He couldn't take a jab without doing the stanky leg. It was clear, it was obvious. This is more evidence to support my theory that Spence is indeed a degrading fighter, and rapidly degrading at that. But remember guys, we are conspiracy theorists. We're just hating on Terence Crawford. Let's pretend we have cataracts and we can't see what we're looking at. Let's pretend we have cataracts. The issue is with this scene, and this scene being the social media boxing community, the issue with this scene is many people view boxing through an emotional lens, and it clouds people's judgment, and it dissuades them from being honest. Because if they're honest, they may have a few critiques of their favourite fighters, or they may have to take quote-unquote credit away from their favourite fighters. And that's what this comes down to, as far as I'm concerned. For some of these people, all that really matters is the results on paper, but there's no nuance, there's no examining what happened on a certain night in a certain fight. None of that, there's no context. It's just so dumb. If you're like that, what's the point of this boxing scene on social media? What's the point? If we're just going to regurgitate the status quo and not look any deeper, what is the point of EYTBC? If that's all we're going to do. I don't understand how people could have watched that fight and come to the conclusion that it was a good version of Errol Spence Jr. and us conspiracy theorists who speculated on Spence's condition. Well, I guess we have a little bit of supporting evidence now, right? Which is kind of funny because that was the Crawford fanboys' main kind of response back in those times was, oh, where's your evidence that Spence was shot? Well, aside from watching the fight, well, here we have some evidence, but I tell you this now, this is what's going to happen. Those people asking for evidence are now going to say, oh, it's just excuses from Errol Spence Jr. Nothing to see here, no pun intended. But some of them may even say it's fake. Yeah, do you know what I mean? Listen, who's the real conspiracy theorist? If you're acting like this fight was what it should have been, I think you're the conspiracy theorist, to be honest with you. But there you go. It is what it is. Anyway, share your thoughts below. What did you think of this video? What do you think of Errol Spence's the latest news surrounding Spence and his health? What do you think? Share your thoughts below. Peace.